Welcome to the second in the series of engagements with EOH Group CEO Stephen Van Coller on how an exponential organizational mindset will bring much needed insights into the EOH journey of navigating industry disruption. Colin Iles of the Innovation Catalyst will be chatting to Stephen and Neal Jacobson from Futureproof. Welcome, gentlemen.
I'm Stephen Van Coller. I'm the Group CEO, and that's not Chief Executive Officer, that's Chief Excitement Officer. That's my job for the next few years. I'm very excited about EOH as a business. I think we're absolutely unique in this whole IT space and the whole fourth industrial revolution. And my pure job is to excite all of you to go and help our customers exponentialize themselves and future-proof their businesses.
Hello, I'm Neal Jacobson. I'm senior partner of an organization called Futureworld International. We're a global business and technology network, and we help customers, such as EOH, understand exactly what those big forces are that are changing the world, how radically the world's changing, and then how do you as an organization respond to those changes.
Hi, my name's Colin Iles, and I'm the founder of Innovation Catalysts. And it gives me immense amounts of pleasure to be sitting here and having an open conversation with Stephen Van Coller, Group CEO of EOH, and Neal Jacobson, and one of the senior partners and founders of Futureworld, probably the foremost South African think tank for dealing with exponential technologies and the future of work. So, Neal, in your travels across the globe, you spend a lot of time doing presentations about the future, the fourth industrial revolution. Is this really happening, or is it just some sort of myth that the newspapers are actually picking up on?
I know it's fundamentally happening, and the biggest issue that we encounter with companies is that they focus on their industry and their business. And we keep saying to them, you've got to step back and look at the big picture, because what's happening in the world is not a shift in pharmaceuticals or technology. It's a fundamental reboot of the global operating system of the world. And to be successful as an exponential leader, you've got to stand back and see that big picture and ask that fundamental question: how do we serve our customer in ways that are radically different? How do we not simply pave the cow path? In other words, take a problem and just digitize it. Does that issue need to be digitized? Does the process actually, is it needed? How do we step back and see what the big picture is rather than just tweak around the edges?
Okay, so let's assume this is actually happening. And when people talk about artificial intelligence, it is actually there. It is there because we don't see it and touch it and feel it, but it's impacting our daily lives whether we realize it or not. And we've got VR coming on the scene, and there's things happening with blockchain, and there's 101 other technologies that are changing our lives exponentially faster than we've ever seen in the history of humankind. And yet organizations seem to be changing incredibly slowly, waking up to the threats and the opportunities that this brings at a snail's pace compared to how development is happening. Why is that?
I think one of the biggest factors is that leadership of organizations tends to be elderly white males around the world. And most of them are looking forward to their retirement rather than looking forward to radical change. I ran a session recently and we asked the CEO, what keeps you awake at night? And he said, dreaming about my retirement. It was the most shattering answer I've ever heard. In a world that is changing radically and in the most exciting fashion we've ever seen. There are such opportunities out there, but it takes courage. It takes bravery. It takes the ability to say we're going to do things differently. And there's only a handful of leaders who are actually prepared to do that. And hopefully we've got one sitting on my right.
Okay, so let's turn to our elderly white male sitting in the middle. Stephen, now I know that you've been studying and following the impact of 4AR for many a year. Would you like to sort of go back and talk through when you first started to see this shift that was happening in the organizations that helped you on that particular journey?
Yeah, I think this whole 4IR or digitization, or however you want to talk about it, it's really moving the power, I suppose, or putting the boot on the consumer's foot. It creates transparency. We've seen it in social media. It creates information, so it's very hard to hide anything. And so it's creating a whole new generation of consumers. What's interesting for me is when I have a look at it, you think about the past. If you were a big corporate, you would spend maybe 30% on development of a product and 70% marketing it and telling everyone how wonderful it was, because there was no way for the crowd or the masses to communicate together. The best, you had if you were lucky, you had a phone at home, a nice big black one, that you used to pick up and dial on. or you would read in the newspapers. There really wasn't a way to communicate. Today, if you don't spend 95% of your money on actually developing the product and making it the best, your marketing today is how people receive the product, how they use it, and how it goes, wild. It was quite interesting. They started that thing on YouTube to get more views than I can't remember who it was, and it was just an egg. But it became a movement, and very quickly, I think it only took a few weeks, and suddenly they had more than 14 million views or whatever it was, just because the crowd wanted to do that. So in today's world, everything's about the consumer. And so if you're not customer-centric, if you're not doing what your customers want from you, you will die slowly because they will move elsewhere. And I think no more evidence, was of Kodak. And, this has been used over and over again, or blockbusters. Kodak thought they must make the most highest resolution photograph on a piece of paper. They didn't care how long it took, because that's what they thought their customers want. So all their R&D was paper and chemicals. And it turned out only probably 2% of their customers were worried about that. The other 98% didn't even mind it was slightly blurred. They just wanted as many photographs as they wanted, not 24 or 36. They wanted to see them at that time, and they wanted to be able to send them to their customers at that time. And they never saw the iPhone coming or the smartphone coming.
Stephen, the other great example, if you think about it, is music. Everybody in the world knows that music's free, except the record companies. And what's happened is that the commodities have not gone away. People still want photographs, people still want news, people still want music. But the organizations that supply those have been fundamentally disrupted because they didn't understand, exactly as per your example, what the customer actually wanted at the end of the day.
I think that's a great example, because what the record companies fail to understand is that if you actually delivered it in a different way, at a tenth of the cost or at 1% of the cost, you'd get 200 times more usage. And so the revenues stayed the same, but they never saw that that's what the customer want. So someone else, like Spotify, Deezer, have taken all their revenue away because they've delivered, that option. So I think that's a great example.
Now, this must make it incredibly challenging, though, for all CEOs and for all leadership teams, because, let's be honest, the customers don't really know what they want. Time and again, you see new products being released. If you'd have asked the customers, you used Apple as an example, what they want, they'd have wanted a better phone, right? They wouldn't have asked for a tablet or a phablet like we have now. Henry Ford, they'd have asked for a faster horse. They wouldn't have asked for a motor car. So how, as a CEO, when you know that your customers are not the easiest to read in terms of what they actually need and want, do you develop the products and services to tap into that as the technology comes in? Is it technology first and you develop some products? Is it some other route? Because it seems to be a struggle for most organizations to avoid those Kodak moments.
Yeah, I think there's two things here. You don't know, so don't pretend you do know. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
If you understand that you don't know, then you can start dealing with the problem. The most interesting thing that happened to me was with Future World, the organization that Neal started, was, when I was sitting at the bank and I woke up and I knew I was going to do my third strategy session with my team. And I thought, if I have to go in there and spend 2 days talking about making it 10% better than last year, actually I shouldn't have the job. That's going to be the most boring 2 days, really adding no value. Why am I getting paid to do that? And the interesting thing is, Deloitte had this thing from the center from the edge, or center at the edge, whatever it's called, John Nagel. And they have this zoom out, zoom in. And I think today, because the world's moving so fast, you've got to go and understand who your competitors will be, who your customers will be, what they want in the future, what they want in 5 years, 10 years' time. And if you can imagine that, then that's where you have to get to. What was interesting for me was when we did that, we realized our strategy had nothing to do with the future. It was all to do with today. And actually, we were going to Pretoria and we were meant to be going to Cape Town. And that was a big, big wake-up for me. And I think if you can just accept, you don't know what the future is going to be, but if you can visualize what you think it could be, and clearly that will change because the world changes fast, you can start moving in the right direction. And this is really what this EXO thing is about. It's about thinking differently about your strategy and solving your customers' problems. It's looking at them from a different lens. It's looking at them so you don't end up with a Kodak, or you don't end up as a Blockbuster, or you don't end up as a Nokia, because I agree with you, sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want till you tell them this is possible. Then they go, that'll be great for my customers, and then you can deal with it.
But Colin, doesn't that relate to the whole concept of a massively transformative purpose and the whole principle of purpose? If you as an organization can develop a purpose of what you're trying to do, and profit incidentally is not a purpose, profit is an outcome. If you have a purpose and drive towards that, along the way you're going to identify what the pain points are for your customers and how you can actually solve those pain points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, I see lots of evidence out there, and let's just go and do a segue into purpose, because you've mentioned EXOs, right? And if people don't know what that is, they should look at Salim Ismail's book, Exponential Organizations, and he lays out a very clear framework that indicates companies that grow faster than their peers by some amount, your Googles, your Teslas, for example, typically have similar attributes that they're applying. Some of those attributes are very obvious ones: staff on demand and crowdsourcing, really having a very variable cost structure. Airbnb is a great example. They don't own a single room, and yet they're the biggest hotelier in the world, leveraging assets. But fundamental to all of those attributes is this idea of purpose. If you're a company that's like Google, we're going to provide information for the world, you somehow get this incredible emotional resonance from your staff, your investors, your customers, becomes a tribal thing, and people just want to do it.
And it doesn't lock you into one particular area of business. It opens the field to virtually anything that you can do.
And we see that here locally. We see that with Discovery as an example. I think Discovery's purpose to help people live longer, to be more healthy, is fundamental to their success. So that's where we get this notion of MTP and massive transformative purpose. But Stephen, you're in the hot seat. You're actually running the businesses, and some people think these ideas of MTP is a bit wishy-washy and tree-hugging, and actually aren't really a core asset for a business to actually get behind. What's your view on this?
So there's two parts to it in my view. If I have a look at Airbnb, I mean, what do? They realized that there was this massive, unused, latent asset just sitting there. You know, people going away on holidays and their house is empty for a month. They realized that people have holiday homes and it's very difficult to rent it out because you've got to go and find an agent, and then whoever wants to rent it out has to go to that agent. I mean, they just revolutionized, or as I put it, took the friction out of renting your house out. And so, boom, it exploded. And so, you know, they might not have even had a real MTP at that point, other than, you know, give everyone cheap housing. So it was almost find the friction, define how you're going to prosecute it. And so sometimes you have to do that. You know, you can have a nice noble purpose about, you know, making everyone in the world rich, but how are you going to do that? What you're going to do? So I think sometimes you have to go back to first your core and say, as a company, what is our asset? You know, I think Amazon was the great example we've talked about. Is they started digitizing books. That was their MTP in terms of, you know, giving people easy access to reading books at a cheaper rate. But actually, their latent asset turned out to be their cloud platform, and that's what revolutionized the company. So,
and the cloud platform came about because they wanted to remove friction. Exactly. In the provision of books for their customers, and then they realized they had this microservices model, and sort of the rest is...
It was their biggest expense that was making digital books more expensive than they needed to be, and they saw it as a great asset. It now is a profit center, not a cost center. You know, they can actually reduce the cost of books even further. So one has to balance the two. So I think, you know, in any company, even in ours, we need to understand what is our key differentiator? What is the asset that we've got that people want? And then we can, you know, create an MTP around that. But at the end of the day, it's all about the customer experience. I mean, you have to have an MTP that is around your customer and your customer experience. If you don't have an MTP around that, you actually, I think you've got it totally wrong.
So EOH is one of the biggest technology companies in Africa. And obviously it's been in the newspapers recently for the last couple of months for not such pleasant news. I find it fascinating we're sitting here having a conversation about 4IR, exponential technologies, massive transformative purpose when you've got this issue that you're trying to resolve from years gone by. How are you dealing with these kind of two, not contradictory, but totally different focus points? One's a cleanup and one's trying to prepare an organisation for a fast-moving world. It must be interesting times.
Yeah, listen, it sort of creates a diversion, I suppose, but at the end of the day, you're always going to have things you have to, sort out. You've seen Uber have to sort things out themselves, even though they've been doing so well. You saw, Spotify. The good thing about EOH is it's just a massively differentiated ICT company, and it grew from nothing to, 11,000 people. Over 5,000 large corporate customers, doing 18 billion rand a year. I mean, that's a pretty big company to build in 20 years. And remember, most of that happened in the last 5 or 6 years, and it just ran away from itself. Doesn't change the fact that, other than the few people we had to let go, there's still 10,990 very good, very capable people. And we need to have a look at how we make them want to come to work. I mean, my philosophy, going to Neal's old white male looking to retire adage, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm obviously moving towards it. But my thing is, in today's world, there's that stat, and Neal, you can correct me, but in the 1930s or 40s, the average life of a company on the New York Stock Exchange was, about 65 years. Today, it's something like 15.
It's down to 7, in fact.
Oh, it's down to 7 now. There you go. See, I'm even losing touch. The point is that you have to future-proof your business. As a leader today, you've got to think about how do you keep this business alive for a long time. It's very, very interesting having a discussion with someone like a Lego. And you speak to the family who own this. They've got a professional CEO. They've got a totally different philosophy, because they know when they get to run the company, if they stuff it up, their kids don't have a future. It was interesting. There's a brandy called Louis XIII. It costs something like 30,000 euros for a bottle, because it gets aged for 100 years. So the family members running the business today are making a product that's going to be sustain their family in 5 generations' time. That's like quite a scary thought. So if you could run a business like that, how would you run it? If it was your kids' future. And I think this is what we have to really look at going forward. And so my philosophy is, I want to build the company that the youngsters want to run in 10 years' time. Because my biggest gripe about every time I become a CEO, I have to spend 2 years changing it, making it fit for purpose, etc. It's never, when you get there, there's always problems. And I think I see this time and time and time again in corporates. People aren't building the business for the future. They're building the business that suits them today. And this goes to Neal's point.
We call this the disease of quarteritis, that you manage your company quarter by quarter in order to please a 25-year-old asset manager who's never worked a day in their life, as opposed to saying, I'm going to build a 10, 20, 30-year company. What's the legacy you as a CEO are going to create and leave behind?
Yeah.
Now, Neal, one of the things that we see frequently when you look at these successful companies, time will tell whether they leave legacies, is they are incredibly good at experimentation programs. They encourage their whole workforce to experiment. They understand that experimentation is critical because you're not sure where it's going to go, but if you don't run those experiments, you're not really hedging the downside risk of your core business starting to fall away over time. And yet we don't see many companies in Africa, or perhaps not so many well-known companies in Africa, visibly running these types of experiments and encouraging their workforce to take risk. Do you know why
Colin,
is that?
It comes back to 2 principles. First of all, the principle of courage. I'm prepared to try something that hasn't been done before. And it comes to the principle of fail fast. That, we're going to try something and we're going to reward intelligent failure rather than punish it. Most of our corporate structures are built around punishing people for failing. Now, how the hell do you think you're going to get people to be innovative if you punish them if it fails? Experimentation implies massive failure. And you look at the great companies of the world, be it the Googles or the Amazons or whatever, they constantly fail. But some of those projects become massively successful, Amazon Web Services and so forth. And it requires a complete and utter change in corporate culture that we're going to, first of all, we're going to encourage experimentation. We're going to encourage autonomy, again, one of the principles of EXO, that we're going to give people the autonomy to try things. We're going to give them the latitude and the time and the resources to try things. And if it doesn't work, well done, you tried. Many big companies now have actual annual failure awards where you reward people for intelligent failure. And that's a mindset change that's got to come.
Yeah, talking about that mindset change, I mean, I think it's interesting. You talked earlier about this. The world's changing so fast. Our customers don't really know what they want, and so in this world, if you don't experiment, how are you ever going to, find that out? So this has become almost like a bread and butter issue, and yet people aren't doing it. And it's almost I liken it to a salesman. When he's under pressure in an economic situation, he cuts his fuel expense. That's like cutting your nose to spite your face. And I think in these tough economic environments, people are looking to cut costs. What do? They cut the easy stuff. But actually, that's the most important stuff. And this is where I think we're seeing a lot of failure. It's short-termism. They're only worried about today, and they cut the wrong things. I mean, we've seen it time and time again.
Now, I know you've been trying... you've been on this journey, I suppose, of discovery for at least 10 years now, and been a thought leader in terms of bringing experimentation to the front and allowing your teams to be a lot more autonomous. But even at your level, and now as Group CEO for EOH, it still seems from the outside it's incredibly hard, because you're talking about trying to get a mind shift change and a behavioural change. It's not really about a precise mathematical formula where this is the way it has to, and people do it. How do you encourage people to make these type of changes, which for some they might find quite uncomfortable and quite new?
So I think there's a few things. I think the big corporate structure and the way businesses ran in the past is dead. I sort of liken them to an oil tanker. You can have all these great ideas, and it doesn't matter who you are, the board, the CEO, the exco, the leaders. You turn that steering wheel on the oil tanker, it still goes straight for the next, 3 kilometers. Fact. What you have to do is you need to create a more modular business. Number one is they call us more anti-fragile, but you create this multi-speed business, and that allows people then in clusters to do stuff and to move into experiment. If you try and experiment for the whole organization, I think it's very, very difficult. And so, very risky. And so you need to, I think, today start creating these different speed worlds, allowing people to make decisions, allowing people within parameters to do stuff. And you need to, encourage it. And you don't need to scrutinize everything. You just want people to be, pitching up, giving 110% to you, and that's when you win. Even in our business here at EOH, 50% of our cost is people. If they only work 80% of the time, that's just my margin gone. And if I can get them to work 100% of the time, that's my margin doubled. And so it's actually mathematically or philosophically, it's not a difficult concept. This is how Google and everything work. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to the Google campus and the Microsoft campus. These are like cool places to be. I've got a picture of me getting free Baskin and Robbins ice cream, walking down the corridor. Not that that's everything, but people like working there. People want to go there. I remember when I was at Deutsche Bank, it was the number one equities house. I think we paid 70 to 80% of the market salaries. But everyone knew if they went there, they'd get the best training. It would be the best place to launch their career. This is what we have to get right as a business.
Thinking about your oil tanker analogy, one of the best examples I heard was from Michael Yudin, who was running FNB when it won that award as the most innovative bank in the world. And he said exactly that. When I took over, he said, I had this huge oil tanker, and I broke it into 100 little torpedo boats. And each torpedo boat had their own skipper, their own crew, and they had the autonomy to make decisions and try new things.
So that's really interesting, because a lot of people, when they would look at that, they'd be concerned that there'd be duplication and wastage, and you'd see an organisation which becomes structurally a bit messy. You're almost reversing from the I won't mention the consultants, but the sort of consultancy model that we're going to help you to bring everything together and consolidate it. It sounds like that's a bit of a course correction there, or am I misinterpreting that?
I think one of the first mistakes is to think that we're in control of everything, and a little bit of chaos, I think, is actually a very, very good thing, because that's where creativity comes from. But sure, you do need to have a basic discipline. I think it's achievable, and it's been demonstrated that it can be done in a number of companies.
Yeah, I think today, if you think as the CEO, you sit at the top of the pyramid and you know, the boss and everything, you're starting on the wrong foot. I mean, all today is, from a leadership perspective, you're a mentor rather than a leader, because no longer are you working in silos, you're working across. You need multi-skilled teams to do different things, because this is what our customers want. And secondly, you're there to enable thought leadership. Yeah. And as you said, as Yudin always tells us, the cleverest people don't work for you. Yeah. And so you have to harness that. And the only way you harness it is creating, torpedo boats. Clearly, the most important thing is, even with a torpedo boat, if you don't get them to attack together or work together, one torpedo boat's not going to dent, anything, but 1,000 of them will. And so it's a balance between, getting this different speed or this agile world, but moving towards this massive transformative, purpose. And if you all know where you're going and what you're doing and what you're attacking, it becomes a totally different ballgame. I suppose it's like the killer ants, Why they succeed is not because they're big and strong, because they're not. They're small and weak, but there's zillions of them, and together they work together. So that's what we have to do.
In many ways, you've probably got a bit of an advantage here at EOH, because unlike large organizations which have gone through this centralization, functionalization type process, and now it's really difficult for them to go and set up these torpedoes, you've already got 100, 200 torpedoes, because it's a lot of very different businesses that have been acquired over the years. And so I guess the challenge is trying to bring them together a little bit more, so they're not quite so standalone, to get those 1 + 1 3 advantages.
That's exactly right. I mean, we've got torpedo boats, we've got artillery, we've got helicopters, we've got attack aircraft, and the problem is that they're all operating individually. We need to start putting them into communities to work together. You don't want to now try and turn 10 speedboats into, one destroyer. You want to have the 10 speedboats, but they must work together. And you need someone to say, actually, I need these speedboats or these torpedo boats helping these helicopters over here. So you've got to coordinate that work. Otherwise, you just have these lots of little skirmishes and you never win the war. You might win a few battles, but you lose the war.
Stephen, the 15th of August, you and your management team, your colleagues, are all going to be going down to Santon, to the Equinox, for 2 days. Could you just talk through what you're hoping that the attendees are going to get out of it?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think this whole EXO, Exponential, people think is a bit of a gimmick. It's a bit like 4IR. But really it's about understanding what the future, where we're going. It's changing the way we think about it, because you've got more information. And it's really a thought process more than anything else. What I don't like about incrementalism is you don't go and challenge the original assumptions. So you take what you've done for the last 10 years and you think it's going to happen in the future. In the speed that our world's changing today, that's fundamentally a wrong assumption. So if you start with the wrong assumption, you're going to get the wrong outcome. So that's the first thing. So I really want us as a team to think about what is the world we live in, where are we going, what do we think it's going to be like in 10 years' time, and how are we prosecuting that. And that, I suppose, needs to be a team decision, because it's not about me. I'm just here to direct the traffic. Everyone in this room is coming to the conference. They're the people at the coalface, delivering. I mean, we need to get a way of work, a way of thinking, a way of partnering with each other that allows us to accelerate our business. And you only get that when people wake up every day and they want to be here and they want to have fun and they feel like they can think outside the box. And then once we've sort of, I suppose, agreed that in the first day, the second day is, okay, what are the few things that we want to do in the next 6 months that will start us on that journey as a team? What do we agree we want to change that's going to make us a better company and a better place to work. And then you can start thinking about how we future-proof the business, how we create something that's going to be sustainable for the youngsters that can still be here in, are we going to be the leaders in 5 or 10 years' time. So it's really just trying to create, this whole army of people moving in the right direction, the same direction, cooperating together to not prosecute battles, but prosecute the war.
EOH 3.0.
Correct.
That was EOH's Group CEO, Stephen Van Coller, on an upcoming initiative that will positively shift the mindset within EOH.